A budget hearing on the Kansas State Department of Education. We will start with an overview by Jennifer Light from KLRD, our fiscal analyst.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Jennifer Light, and I'm the KLRD analyst. In front of you, you have 4 pieces of paper that we printed off for you today. The yellow piece of paper is the governor's recommendations and what that was not included in the original House Bill 2007. There is a document titled Expenditures Included in Sub for House Bill 2007, which we talked about last week. There is a pink shorthand, which was also the document from last week, but we wanted to make sure you had copies of everything today. And then we have the document that I'll be starting my presentation off of, which is the budget summary. So I will be referencing both the budget summary and the shorthand, and I'll make sure to call out which ones I'm referencing when. But those are the 2 documents I'm going to be speaking from today. So in the budget document in front of you, or Senator Erickson, it's page 79 in the binder if you have your binder. I'm going to start on page 2. Or page 80, as it says. The agency requested $6.6 billion, including $4.8 billion SGF for fiscal year 2025. House Bill 2007, as introduced, also had $6.6 billion and $4.8 billion SGF. And then sub for House Bill 2007 has $6.6 billion with $4.8 billion SGF. It is slightly higher in the substitute bill than it was in the original bill due to some additional reappropriations being added back in. The bottom of page 80, you can see that the agency carried over $21.6 million in unspent SGF monies from fiscal year 24 into 25. This includes reappropriations for state foundation aid, supplemental state aid, school district juvenile detention facilities, and then special education state aid. School district juvenile detention facilities and special education state aid were removed in House Bill 2007. And in the sub for House 2007, they added back in the special education state aid. So at this point, in front of you, the only SGF reappropriation that is not included is the $2.1 million for the school district juvenile detention facilities. Top of page 81 talks about other reappropriations. There were $2.5 million in CIF and key monies that were carried over from 24 into 25. Includes the list including early childhood block grant, early childhood infrastructure, imagination library, parents as teachers, pre-K pilot, and children's cabinet administration. All of these are currently in the bill. There were no supplemental requests from the agency in fiscal year 2025. As of right now, the sub for House Bill 2007 includes items 4 through 8. This includes the consensus numbers and some salary and wages adjustments done by the agency, but all of these are currently in the bill as it stands in front of you. Top of page 83 begins the fiscal year 2026 request. The agency requested $6.8 billion with $5.1 billion in SGF. As you can see in the table, figure 7, there were 9 enhancement requests. The interim committee did remove all 9 of those. So House Bill 2007, as introduced, was $6.7 billion, including $4.8 billion SGF. Sub for House Bill 2007 currently includes $6.7 billion, including $4.8 billion SGF, but it is slightly higher than it was as introduced. We'll talk through those with the enhancements. Top of page 84 starts the actual enhancements requests. So item number 1 is special education state aid. The agency requested $87.6 million SGF for special education state aid as the first of a 3-year plan to get to 92% in excess costs. The governor's recommendation included $72.6 million in a 4-year plan. House Bill 2007, as introduced, again, had no money in additional special education state aid. And then the sub for House Bill 2007 has $10 million SGF in fiscal year 2026. There is not a plan, a 4-year plan or a 3-year plan, is just a one-time add of the $10 million. It does include the maintenance of effort of that $10 million into 2027, but there is not an additional $10 million on top of that in 27. Bottom of page 84 is safe and secure schools. So the agency requested an enhancement of $10 million for the Safe and Secure Schools Grant Program for fiscal year '26, which would have increased it to $15 million SGF. The legislature had appropriated $5 million per year in fiscal years '24 and '25. In sub for House Bill 2007, so what is currently in the budget, as it came from the House, there is $0 in '26. So they not only did not include the requested enhancement, they deleted the $5 million that was in the Safe and Secure Schools. There is, over the course of 3 years, $20 million in the Attorney General's office, which is specifically for safe and secure firearms detection. So that's $7 million in '25, $7 million in '26, and then $6 million in '27. There is money in safe and secure grants in '25 in KSDE. There is not currently any money for safe and secure grants in House Bill 2007, or the sub for House Bill 2007. The governor's recommendation for this enhancement did not include the recommendation for the enhancement, but she did keep the $5 million that was the baseline in there. For professional development, the agency requested an additional $4.5 million SGF for the professional development program, which would have moved it to $6.25 million and would fully fund the program. The program had received appropriations of $1.8 million SGF each year in fiscal years '23 through '25. There is the $1.8 million that was the base is currently in a sub for House Bill 2007. There is not the enhancement request for $4.5 million. For the mentor teacher program, there's an additional $1 million SGF that the agency requested for the mentor teacher program for fiscal year '26, which would bring the total appropriation to $2.3 million. Currently, in the sub for House Bill 2007, there is not any additional funding, so it is at $1.3 million for the mentor teacher program. Item number 5 at the bottom of the page. The agency requested an enhancement for $1 million SGF to replace the State Fiscal Recovery Fund funding for the E-rate program. So this funding currently provides the 10% state match for the E-rate program. And the E-rate program provides discounts on high-speed internet access and telecommunications in eligible schools and libraries nationwide, with priority given to schools and libraries in low-income and rural areas. In the House Bill 2007, as it was introduced, there was $0. In the current bill as it stands now, there's $500,000 SGF. The governor's recommendation did not have any money for the enhancement request. Item number 6, implement 2024 House Sub for Senate Bill 387. The agency's request included $626,500 SGF and 6 FTEs to implement provisions of House Bill 2024 House Sub for Senate Bill 387, along with a request because due to reporting requirements and administrative responsibilities that have increased since 2021 without any additional appropriations to support the additional work within the agency. In the sub for House Bill 2007, so the agency's request is 6 FTEs and $626,500. Currently, there are 0 FTEs and $184,500, which if you look at the figure 9 in the middle of page 86, covers the 2 bottom ones, the coordinator and the education program consultants, the funding for that, but not the actual FTEs. Item number 7 at the bottom of page 86 is CTE transportation. The agency requested just under $518,000 SGF to fully fund the career and technical education transportation system. This would increase total funding to $2 million for fiscal year '26 and would fully fund the program. There is no additional money in the current sub for House Bill 2007, nor was there any additional money given in the governor's recommendation. Top of page 87 is the State Board of Education's compensation request. The agency requested $170,000 SGF to increase the compensation of the members of the Kansas State Board of Education for fiscal year '26. Since the 1970s, the state board member salaries have been tied to the state legislative salaries. Currently, in the bill, there is not any additional funding going towards it. The governor's recommendation also did not include the additional $170,000. However, I do want to mention that there is a bill currently in the House side, specifically on the board member compensation. It's House Bill 2382. Item number 9, middle of page 87, is replacing the E-rate transfer from the Kansas Board of Regents. So I want to point out that item number 9 and item number 5 are two different requests. Item number 5 deals with the state match funding, whereas item number 9 deals with the operations for dealing with the E-rate. So currently there is a transfer of just under $96,000 SGF, or $96,000 that comes from the Kansas Board of Regents to the Kansas Department of Education for this transfer for the operations portion of the E-rate. And that is currently still in the bill. So in sub for House Bill 2007, the transfer is still there, so the $95,000 is coming from the KBOR account to the special revenue account. The governor recommended removing the transfer, but did not recommend increasing the money by SGF, and then the agency was requesting removing the transfer and adding SGF. So that concludes the enhancements section of fiscal year 2026. Outside of that, the only item in items 10 through 17 that is not currently in the bill is item number 14, which is the 20 mills reauthorization. This is due to the fact that after discussion with the revisers, the 20 mills reauthorization is being worked as a policy bill, not as part of the budget. In the past, it's been worked within the education mega bill because it was both budget and policy. But since the budget bill is not a policy bill, it's an appropriations bill, the 20 mil reauthorization is not currently in sub for House Bill 2007. I'd like to point out that on pages 2 and 3 of the pink shorthand is the KSDE shorthands outside of what we've already talked about. Item number 4 in fiscal year 2026 is a $2 million ARPA interest for child care facility operations in Southwest Kansas. So that was added by the House, but it is currently not in the budget due to a global that came through Senate Ways and Means. So the House sub for House Bill 2007 had it in the budget, but as the budget is currently being worked in Senate Ways and Means, that $2 million is not in the Senate's version of the bill as it stands currently. Then items 6 through 8 deal with language additions. So for items 6 and 7, the youth program job exploration and the Spark Wheel funding, that is directing that funding that SGF funding from within existing resources be used to help with those two programs. Currently, those two items would be found under the operating expenditures fund in the agency. Item number 8 adds language that the district level excess cost document that is reported to the districts and to the legislature and published by the agency will include a percentage. Currently, it has a dollar amount, but not a percentage, and so the House would like to see a percentage and a dollar amount for the district level excess cost document that they are doing. Finally, last but not least, on the gold sheet, we have what the governor's differences are. There are 2 items on there that are not in the budget currently, we've covered everything. The reduced price copay for school lunches, the $5.5 million to help cover copay costs for breakfast and lunch for at-risk students is not in there. Neither is the AP test fees for low-income students, the $500,000 SGF for low-income students. Madam Chair, I know that was a lot of information very quickly. I would like to remind everybody that if you look at the expenditures document that I provided you, on each line, it has the title of the bolded section from the budget summary. So if you want to see what each one has done so far, it would go across and you could see what the funding is for that. With that, Madam Chair, I'd be happy to stand for questions or let the agencies get up here and speak.
Committee questions. Senator Gossage.
Forgive me, Jennifer, maybe it's right in front of me, but you keep saying the governor's budget doesn't or does include this or that. Where can we see that?
So the yellow piece of paper in front of you includes the items that the governor's budget included that were not included in the original HB 2007. So all the items listed here were not included in the original House Bill 2007. As it stands now, and on the gold sheet in fiscal year 2025, that item number 1 is currently in the bill. In fiscal year 2026, items 1 and 2 are currently in the bill. Item 3 is not at that amount, it's at $10 million. 4 and 5 are not in the bill. 6 is not in the bill as it stands because the transfer from KBOR is still there. And then 7 was, instead of the 10 million SGF, there was the 2 million ARPA, which is not currently in the Senate's side. So the House side has $2 million from ARPA interest, but the Senate side currently does not have that due to the global and Senate Ways and Means.
Other questions? Senator Petty.
So I'm being redundant here, and you keep saying it, so I just want to have maybe a total clarification. There are some items that you just said that the House did that are in the bill as passed out by the House 2007, but because of a proviso in Ways and Means, could you just go over each one of those again? I know you just said the one about the Child Care Accelerator Grant.
That is the only one, Madam Chair, that has been pulled out due to the Senate Ways and Means Global. So item number 7 under fiscal year 26 is the only item that came across on the House is at 2.0 million ARPA interest. And due to the ARPA interest global withdrawal that came in Senate Ways and Means, it's the only item that was pulled out by Senate Ways and Means before the budget came to your committee.
Just as a follow-up, so it's the only one that was tied to ARPA. So there was nothing else in the education budget that got pulled out because of the other proviso that?
That is my understanding.
Okay.
I will caveat that with, unless there was a global that happened this morning that I missed.
No, nothing happened this morning. I'm talking about the 2 from last week. Because it's, for anybody who's not on Ways and Means, it was unclear if you were in the room. Then I did have a question, though, about the CTE transportation. I didn't quite catch what you said. It's on page 86. Is the current funding in there?
The current funding is still in the budget as it stands, yes. So we're talking about just over just under $1.5 million for CTE transportation is currently in the budget. It's the additional 517 that is not in the budget. So the money that is listed in that first line is not in the budget as it came over from the House, that 517,000.
Okay, so the current funding is, but this 517 would bring them up to be able to pay for all of the students that are currently, that are in the program and need transportation. So, but the current funding is there, just not the addition.
That is correct, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Senator Sykes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Jennifer, and thank you for providing me with information I asked for last week. I appreciate that. 2 questions. One, you can get back to me, but the language, and I've got to look, on that change in special ed, that proviso language, can you get that language for the committee to look at? And then my other question is just as I am looking at the overall budget from 2025 to 2027, I am seeing a $500 million decrease. Is most of that in higher ed or State Board of Education? Where is that $500 million?
You referencing the $500 million on, so what I would say is we do not do a full budget for either, for the Kansas Department of Education for fiscal year 27. We do caseloads, which is the main state aid portions, but we do not do state operations. We do not do all the additional state aid that goes out. This is just the first round at the consensus numbers that are there.
Thank you for that clarification.
Senator Blasey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just one point of clarification on this original sheet, the white sheet, these are all the agency requests, and if I heard you right, everything's pretty much been deleted except for 10 on, more or less, with that one exception. But you said something about, on number 2, the safe and secure schools. I wasn't quite following. What is left in the budget as of today?
So for fiscal year / for the Kansas State Department of Education, there is $5 million. For fiscal year 2026, in the budget as it sub for House Bill 2007, there is $0 in the Safe and Secure Schools grant. There is a program which was created in the Attorney General's office, which is called the Safe and Secure Firearms Grant, which will do funding for a firearms detection program within both schools and other public buildings, but it is not specifically for public schools. And that proviso includes $7 million in fiscal year '25, $7 million in '26, and $6 million in '27. But it is not specifically directed towards public schools.
So if I heard you correctly, there's only $5 million in the Safe Secures grant, which is being added to this year's fiscal year?
It's not being added to this year.
it's just
in
remaining.
the base. That's what the amount was for '25. They didn't ask for, or the agency did not include a supplemental request for '25. They included the supplemental request for '26.
Got it, which is not added. Okay, thank you.
Senator Petty.
So I'm just going to follow up on that question because I thought I understand and then I wasn't sure I did. So in '26, there are no dollars in safe and secure schools.
That is correct.
And under the funding that's with the Attorney General's office, that's for a specific program, the firearms grants. It is for public schools and non-public schools. But there is that caveat that you have to, well, it's specific, very specific, under the firearms grant is how that can be applied for.
That is correct. And Madam Chair, I'd be happy to get the language from that for the committee if they want to see it.
Committee, other questions? Okay, I do have a couple, Jennifer, along those lines. So of the 7 million, or total of 20 million for the Zero Eyes over at the AG's office, how much of that is specifically for K-12 versus other public?
It is not broken out between the two. It is just for, my understanding, based on the last reading of the language in the bill, and I'd be happy, again, to get the language from the bill for you all to see yourselves, is that it's not specifically broken into public schools, non-public schools, state entities. It's one bucket for any of them to apply to.
Okay, I'd like to see that broken out, but we'll deal with that later. So the 5 million for last year, safe and secure grants, where is that money? How is it spent? Because the verbiage for how that was to be spent was vetoed by the governor, but I don't know what happened to the $5 million. Do you know?
Madam Chair, the state agency had posted who got the grants on their website. I do not believe I have it up here, but I'd be happy to get you the listing for how the 25 grants went out to the different districts. I do know. I do know that it was prorated out to the districts that did receive it, but I'd be happy to get you the full list of where those went.
Okay, thank you. And my final question is, can you tell us how much for 24 and 25 the CPIU increase was?
Yes, I can. For fiscal year, Madam Chair, I don't have 24 and 25 up here with me, but I'd be happy to get that answer for you real quick.
I would appreciate that. Thank you. Any other questions? Senator Thomas.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Question, On page 80, where it says the agency carried over 21.6 million unspent SGF monies, when you say carried over, does that mean non-spent went into savings, went back into SGF? Where does that money go?
So that money is within these 4 specific funds, and they're reappropriated into those 4 specific funds for the next year. State foundation aid and supplemental state aid and special education state aid usually are carried over in the consensus discussions, so we work that into what was carried over. And then the school district juvenile detention facilities has reappropriations language specifically for that fund.
Got it. Madam Chair, one more, if I may. Do we have the approximate dollar amount from the federal government with regards to special ed funding this year? Did it go up? It's mainly what I'm asking.
In the fall consensus, we had it at roughly $128 million for federal aid for special education for fiscal year 2025. And that's what we use moving forward. We use the same amount when we do our estimates farther out.
Thank you.
I couldn't speak as to whether or not it went up from 24.
Okay, seeing no other questions, thank you so much, Jennifer. We will move on now to Dr. Frank Harwood, Deputy Commissioner of Fiscal and Administrative Services from KSDE. Welcome back to committee.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, happy to be here with you today. Ms. Light did a good job of kind of going through things, so I'll probably kind of skim through things, but happy to stop and answer questions. This is a little bit different than typical, where we'd be talking about our budget requests. As opposed to that, we're going to talk about for House Bill 2007, and then we'll kind of get to some of our requests and why we had them in there. The first part is, we appreciate House Sub for HB 2007 incorporating the consensus estimates. In doing that gets agreement about 98.3% of the funding, so that gets down to some smaller ticket items. So special education at $600 million certainly would not be a small ticket. On that, just KSA 723422 calls for appropriation at 92% of statewide excess costs for 2025. That's at 75.4%. Just to make sure everybody knows that in the $75 million that was added in 2025, $2.5 million of that was federal funding that is not carrying forward. So although the SGF increase is $10 million, the net increase in special education state aid is $7.5 million. And with that, then we would estimate that we would be at 73.2% of statewide excess costs. The state board was in favor of increasing special education because of increasing costs and decreasing the reliance on general fund and supplemental general fund to offset the required special education costs. So in mentioning that, we'll talk about the House Committee on K-12 budget recommended a $30 million increase. It got changed to $10 million in appropriations. We'd also be supportive of the governor's $72.6 million, and of course, we'd be supportive of the state board's request of $82.7 million. I want to talk a little bit about state fiscal recovery fund, or E-rate funding. These get confused easily. This one is an infrastructure fund. So a school district, if they meet FCC guidelines on having lower bandwidth than what the FCC sets that at, can apply for federal funds through the FCC. E-rate on your cell phone or your regular phone, whatever, if you look at the universal fee, that's E-rate funding. So that goes to the FCC and it comes back to mostly school districts and libraries as E-rate funding. So this funding is for infrastructure projects specifically. And what happens is that if a district is more than 50% free lunch and they qualify, they can get 80% of the funding of that program paid for with federal funds. If the state pays a 10% match, the feds will pay the other 10%. So if you have a high enough free and reduced lunch, you can actually get the program paid for. We had originally asked for $1 million. We are very comfortable with the $500,000 because we just never know what it's going to be each year. It's been as low as $39,000 to as much as $400,000. However, if Wichita and Kansas City and Topeka all put in for things in 1 year, it would be a higher amount of money, which is why we went for the $1 million, understanding that that would all just get reappropriated at the end of the year. It could only be used for those funding. So just a little bit on that one. The next one I want to talk about is the implementation of House sub for Senate Bill 387. One of the things you might remember from that is an at-risk accountability plan that we are currently doing a pilot program for, and then it gets implemented in the 26-27 school year. In order to effectively implement that program, KSD needs staff to do that. So we originally asked for 6 people to do that. 2 of them were auditors because we were looking at beginning to audit at-risk expenditures. We don't currently audit at-risk expenditures. We only audit what records that get districts the funding that they get. So we don't audit expenditures. They have a CPA that does that. So we don't need to do that. The funding for 2 positions that's in the current bill, we would use that at the beginning this next year for the development of the process, probably with IT to do that. And then those 2 positions would become in CSAS, which is and they would be supporting districts as they implement their at-risk accountability plans. So we do, although we have need for the 6 FTE, the idea of we would appreciate retaining the $184,500 with no additional FTE. And just so you know, on that one, FTE conversations were always interesting in the legislature, much different than when I was the superintendent. And so we will repurpose unfilled FTE so that we don't grow the number of FTE, but we have to have funding in order to fill the positions. There are a couple of technical problems that need to be addressed with HB 2007 I want to talk about. The first one has to do with the language around the virtual reality career exploration program and Spark Wheel. The motion that was made is that we could pay for those out of any SGF appropriations. The language that's currently in there is it comes out of our operating expenses. However, appropriations said, well, we have this ability to transfer between funds. The idea that we could transfer from state foundation aid into our operating funds, we think that is a bad precedent to set. So we really just need those expenditures to be made from any SGF appropriations. If the Senate decides to keep those in the bill, those were not our requests. There's another one about capital improvement state aid, and this one will pique everybody's interest. We have an account that has $328 in it, and we don't have any way to spend it. And so all we want to do is transfer it back to the SGF. The problem is the current bill has it going to a specific fund in the SGF. We don't think that's allowed. So just get rid of the fund number and just put it back in the SGF, and the state will be $328 richer. And then the last one is a proviso language about special education. So there is a proviso language that got added for 2026 that we have to calculate a percentage with the district excess costs. That's fine. The problem is that when they pasted that into 2027, they eliminated all the proviso language that is usually there, which has the reappropriation language that's always been there and directs us how to distribute the funds. That language, which is in our testimony, needs to be replaced. And then there's a little bit about the Children's Initiative Fund. We'll have time for Melissa Rooker to come up and talk about that. Our concern with that is that the way the bill is currently written appears to inadvertently set up a new agency. And so we think that's something that needs to be looked at. A couple other funds, just to talk about mentor teacher program. We originally asked for $1 million, and that would allow us to pay the $1,000 stipend to all new teachers with a mentor through their first 3 years. Currently, we can do a $1,000 stipend for first-year teachers, and about this actually goes to the mentor, not the first-year teacher, about $500 for the second-year mentors, and then we currently don't have any funding for the third year that's allowed for in state law. House K-12 budget put $700,000 into that, and certainly we would be happy with that funding as well. The career and technical education transportation, again, the funding is still there. That's always been there. We prorate it out based on the type of transportation that school district uses. Just to be clear, this is transportation that districts provide to students to technical and community colleges to take approved CTE programs. This would have been Senate Bill 155 to begin with. Now it's called Excel and CTE because there's probably a different Senate Bill 155 now, and that would confuse people. And so this would allow for complete reimbursement for those programs. Safe and secure schools, I want to talk about that a little bit. So that was $5 million. And so for 2025, the agency distributed those funds based on the proviso from 2024 with the addition of AEDs because that's what was added. That was the language was in there. So school districts could have spent it on AI gun detection software if they chose to, and AEDs, but with the language gone, we used it the way that it had been used in the past with the addition of AEDs. For 2026, there is no funding for Safe and Secure Schools grants. Now, there are 2 Safe and Secure Schools positions with KSDE. They do a lot more work than just administer the grant. That was one of their things. They actually collect crisis plans from districts. They go out to districts and help them create crisis plans. And I think it was Senate Bill 263 that you heard last week that, if passed, would require KSDE to put out evidence-based plans. Those folks would be the ones to do that. So there is funding for 2 positions, but currently in the bill, there is no funding for any Safe and Secure Schools grants. The next one is professional development. The state board believes that professional development is very important to improving student outcomes and recruiting and retaining teachers. So we've asked the enhancement request would provide professional development reimbursements to states in line with what is allowed in current law. And so the current law says pending appropriations. And so this is the appropriation that would be required to give districts the full amount that they would be eligible to under the guidelines of the law. The next one is I have is state board compensation. And so, so for this year, every elected official got a raise except for the state board. The state board compensation hasn't changed since the last time the legislative compensation changed, whenever that was. And so the law actually continues to read that state board members will be compensated by the same as legislators, but the reference to the current statute is broken because the legislative pay got moved to a different statute. So it stays the same. So the request was that state board members continue to get their salary tied to legislative pay, which would include an automatic escalator, which is built into the legislative pay increase as well. And then the last one is the replace E-rate transfer from the Kansas Board of Education, or the Kansas Board of Regents. So in this situation, we're fine with what's there. The transfer comes from a specific fund that used to be for Can Connect or something else, where KBOR was managing internet access to schools. That program stopped, but there was still funding. So there was a transfer for us to manage or to help districts with E-rate. This E-rate is different. This E-rate is actually used by districts, also by libraries, to pay for basically their internet bill and some other things that are with that. The department is required to provide support, and when we also have to help them with their applications to provide the right information so that verify that information. E-rate is different than other federal funds that we manage. In most cases, the funds come to us, and then we're allowed to keep a percentage for administration. E-rate goes directly to the district, so there is no way for us to recoup the administrative costs that we have that we're required to do to administer the program. And so with that, knowing that you guys have a tight timeline, I'm happy to stand for questions, or we can let Mrs. Rooker come up and talk about early childhood.
Thank you. Let's go ahead and have Executive Director Rooker so that we make sure we get her testimony in, and then we'll open it up for questions. Welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, members of the committee. I will keep this short and sweet because the baseline contents of the budget related to the Children's Initiative Fund is actually, I'm here to support the way the line item appropriations read for you in the substitute House Bill 2007. I will note that we had to request that 2 line items not be funded in the FY26 budget. That request was honored. The governor's budget had included that request, so the legislature adopted. That is directed to, the request comes from a vote from our Children's Cabinet Governing Board. We do our budget recs in June. So we are very happy with the content of the Children's Initiative Fund. But as Frank mentioned, Dr. Harwood, there was a motion made in House Appropriations. I was not there the day it was made. It was the chair who brought the motion. He and I have had an ongoing conversation over multiple sessions about how difficult it is for you to follow as lawmakers the mechanics of the Children's Initiative Fund, its relationship to the Kansas Endowment for Youth, and the health overall of that universe of funding. So I did submit testimony that gives you a KLRD prepared document that has on one side a summary of the Kansas Endowment for Youth, and on the other side, it's the full Children's Initiative Fund budget, because this committee is just seeing the sections that are in the education section. So the motion was made to move all of the CIF and key fund appropriations into one section of the budget. It was not intended to create a state agency. It's the wording in this clause that creates the difficulty. So we can talk about methods of addressing it. I think I've met with revisers and research staff. So we are encouraging a fix, and whether it's considered a technical fix, whether it's an actual action that you all have to take, I will leave that to wiser people than me. But I will happily stand for questions. I know for new members of the legislature, there may be a lot of questions about what the Children's Cabinet is, what we do, what the Key Fund and the CIF are. I would be happy to come back when there's more time to discuss, but we won't go into all of that today. So, Madam Chair, at the appropriate time, if there are questions for me, I'm happy to stand for them.
Thank you so much. Committee, what questions do we have for Dr. Harwood or Executive Director Rooker? Senator Gossage, then Senator Petty.
Thank you, Dr. Harwood, if you could come up. Always good to see you again.
See you.
So it's outlined here on page 13 about the State Board of Education compensation, and it mentions that they're not suggesting that the state board requests the same annual pay, but then it doesn't say what their annual pay is.
So the state board doesn't have an annual salary, so the legislature moved to an annual salary. The request was for the state board's daily rate to change to the daily rate that the legislatures have while in session. And so the first version of the bill and the way we came up with the fiscal note was we took, your salary, 60% or 60-some percent is while you're in session, divided by 90 days is $286 a day. And so that was what we looked at for the daily rate of compensation for the state board members.
So then how many days would they have?
So the budget is built on 78 days on average. I will say that different board members have a lot different number of days. The chair and co-chair and the legislative liaisons have more days. So a regular board member on average probably has around 40 or so days. And then some of the other ones could have as many as 100.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Senator Petty.
I'll start with Melissa. Melissa, what you mentioned was the fact that the language, and can you just tell me, I have the bill in my office, but what page that's on?
So it begins on the bottom of page 176. It's a section, the heading is Kansas Children's Cabinet, and it used the language that exists in prior iterations, which says there is appropriated for the above agency from the Children's Initiatives Fund for fiscal year ending June 30, 2026, the following. In years past, and that would be in the DCF section of the budget. So the above agency would be DCF, and it would be the line item in our Children's Initiative Fund that transfers to DCF. But here, it's been transferred into a section, the heading is Kansas Children's Cabinet. So when it says the above agency, that is the Children's Cabinet. So I will leave it to the revisers whether there is a fix or whether it has to revert back into the specific sections. It's not for me to say, but it would either need to identify the agency the transfer is intended to or revert. But keeping it as it is a budget mechanics problem.
So so we have a language technicality
Yes.
here. But it was, this was brought forward by the chair of appropriations?
Yes.
That was my main question, thanks.
Committee, other questions? Senator Sykes.
Thank you. This is for Dr. Harwood. Can you talk again about, so House Bill 2007 had an increase of $10 million for SPED funding. And what were you saying about that difference of that 2.5 million? Was it federal?
Right. So in FY 2025, there was a $73 million increase in SGF to special education, and then an additional $2.5 million, which was ARPA funds, for a total of a little over $75 million in increased state special education funding. That the $2.5 million doesn't move forward. So 2007 has a $10 million SGF increase, but since the $2.5 million in federal doesn't move forward, it's a net increase of 7.5. And the only reason that's important is that we lose a little bit more ground from the 75% we're at. So,
Senator Blasey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Quick question on if a school district hire a reading specialist, is it possible that that reading specialist would be a SPED teacher only, or is it possible that they're gen ed, or is there a differentiation?
So they can only be paid out of special education funds if they are serving a student's IEP. So if you had a teacher that was licensed as a special education teacher and was also a reading specialist, you could have them paid out of two different funds, so they could serve general education students at one time. But the key is you can't pay them out of special education funds except the time they are serving an IEP.
Senator Petty.
So this is a follow-up question concerning, you were saying the language that's related to the virtual reality career exploration program and Spark Will. So when I'm looking here, it's directing the State Board of Education to pay to Spark Will is that correct?
That's correct.
And so what were you?
So the motion, actually it's over time, the last motion that was made was that the agency would pay it out of any SGF appropriation. So as an example, we have a $2 million appropriation for a virtual math program that usually only costs about $800,000 a year. That's very specifically worded language, so anything that doesn't get spent just gets reverted back at the end. With this language that's out of anyone, then we could say, well, there's money left over here so we can pay for the VR thing out of that or some portion of Spark Wheel out of that. Tying it to just our operating fund means that it comes out of the $20 million of operating fund that we have. So part of the issue I think we run into is that we have a really big budget. I mean, it's over $6 billion, but our operating fund is $20 million. And so when you talk about out of existing funds, that's one thing. Out of operating funds is something very different. And when you look at we have $20 million to administer over $6 billion in programs. It's actually pretty cost effective. So we feel like that we can't afford to do that out of operating funds. And it wasn't the intention of the motion. It's just what the wording says now. I have no idea. We didn't make the request. It was just added during appropriations. That is my understanding.
Senator Sykes.
Thank you. My other question just on SPED, and this is a significant decrease in what the requested increase was. But nationwide, I think SPED is at 15% of all students, and I think Kansas is a little higher at 17%. Is that because we include gifted in our SPED, or do we have a breakdown?
I don't have that. We could look at that, and we could find out what our percentage is without gifted. If gifted is included, that 3% could easily be for gifted, because we are one of very few states that actually count gifted as a special education situation. So we can look into that.
And final question, Senator Argabright.
Madam Chair, more for you. What is our process and what's our, with all of this? This is a 50-minute on $6 billion, and so what's our next steps, and what are our expectations, maybe?
Great.
Thank you.
Great segue. We're just preparing you to be on Ways and Means, because that's about how it feels in there. Isn't that right, Senator Petty? So, okay, great question. So tomorrow we're going to hear the budgets for the School of the Deaf and School of the Blind. On Wednesday, what we will do is make recommendations that I will then report out to the full Senate Ways and Means Committee on this budget on Monday, next Monday. And so we just recommend from the Education Committee what we think should be included in the education budget, but then it's up for Ways and Means to decide. Does that help you?
Yes, thank you. So if we want to move some numbers, we're going to vote on that. Am I understanding correctly?
Correct. You come back on Wednesday prepared to say, I think this ought to be the recommendation to the Ways and Means Committee, and we'll vote on those recommendations. Then I will report those recommendations from our committee to Ways and Means. Yes, yeah, great question. Okay, committee, so that kind of outlines tomorrow and Wednesday, so come prepared to make recommendations on Wednesday. Thursday, we are going to have a presentation on the master teachers. Originally, we were going to have a joint committee. That's no longer the case. We will just be down in our regular room, and they're going to come to us rather than, we'll still have our presentation, but we'll just be in our regular room. Is there any other business? Senator Petty.
We do have some written testimony, is that correct? To go along with the budget items?
Yes. Oh, yes, I'm so sorry. Yes, thank you. There is written only testimony on the budget. I believe there are copies, but also on the S drive. So thank you for that reminder, Senator Petty. With that, committee, we are adjourned.